weave it together, coming up short and giving up never. Weave it together, come along, come along, come along, come along. Mending it together. A world on
I think, Lana, we give people maybe 5 minutes. Is that okay? Just people will join.
Mend it together, a stitch in time is gonna save nine. A stitch in time is gonna save nine. And I wanna be a catalyst for change, trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game, 'cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be. Dreaming together. Some say hope is a thing with feathers. We're gonna dream together. It sings a song, never stops at all. It sings a song, never stops at all. And I wanna be a catalyst for change, trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game, 'cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be. Walk along together, side by side, through this stormy weather. We're gonna walk along together, hand in hand, hand in hand, hand in hand, hand in hand. And I wanna be a catalyst for change, trying something different. I wanna change.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. This year's Catalyzing Change Week is about solutions from the front lines by social innovators.
In 2022, Catalyst 2030 concentrated its efforts on bringing proximate leaders and frontline solutions to the forefront. Collaborations led by members from the Global South produced groundbreaking reports on climate and transforming education, with an emphasis on offering local solutions. We continued our mission to create an enabling environment for social entrepreneurs to flourish by initiating a letter to donors, signed by more than 1,200 social entrepreneurs and innovators. The Catalyst 2030 awards ceremony was spectacular, and the awards themselves welcomed by the private sector, governments, bio multilaterals and donors.
Catalyst 2030 as a movement is disruptive.
One of the best things I think that's come out of Catalyst 2030 so far is incredible collaboration across the ecosystem that just didn't exist before Catalyst came into being.
The thing I love most about Catalyst is that it's an open movement for social entrepreneurs around the world.
I'd encourage anyone who's looking to be more connected with their local communities around social development goals to come along to Catalyzing Change Week.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week.
Welcome, everyone. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Lana, and welcome to everybody. I expect we'll get some people still joining. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Alan Braithwaite. I'm the chair of the Catalyst 2030 working group on disasters and disaster management. And I've been working on this for a bit over 2 years now, and we've been developing a strategy. And I have learned a huge amount from working with Catalyst. I've learned a huge amount from working with people right across the world. And the big conclusion is that there is a better way of addressing disasters, but actually the whole humanitarian space. So if I may, what I'll do is I'll just share a little bit of that journey with you through a file share, and then I'll introduce our panelists and playing to what Giroux said in that initial video, very much drawing on their experience from the front line and hoping to learn from them what they've seen that works and how things might be changed in the future. So that's the agenda we're on, and let me now see if I can figure out how to share the slides. There we are, share screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. So that's our title, Transforming How the World Deals with Disasters. And our strap line for the working group is Make Local Central. How do we leverage the skills and capabilities of the people on the ground? And with luck, I can move it on to the next one. Just for those of you who don't know Catalyst, and I think most of you will, it's a global movement of social entrepreneurs. It's founded in late 2019, so it's been going 3 and a bit years. It's now got 2010 member organizations, 124 countries, and the focus is on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals through the efforts of social entrepreneurs and local social enterprise. And here's a video that we used in my own organization, the Aid Files, really to try and make the point, and hopefully you'll get some insight into the common theme. I've got to move it on, which is always a challenge. There we go. So wonderful faces, fabulous dignity. I'm an old man. I'm nearly 77, and I've come to this area of humanitarian work late. But I've come with a background in business management and business consulting and supply chain and logistics. And the vision that we've developed at the Catalyst 2030 Disasters Group is a new operating model with social enterprise, social entrepreneurs at a core. So a big idea, mobilizing and equipping local social entrepreneurs to be a core part, not taking over, but a core part of the system, collaborative, faster, more effective, and in the context of global pressure on funding for humanitarian work, maybe we can find a new way. And we've come up with an operating model, which we're now looking for funding support for, which contains the whole context of introducing collaboration across agencies and with government, introducing knowledge and learning, obviously gathering the funding, creating protocols so people know what their role in this new model is, and leveraging information and communication technology for everyone. And we're now trying to put that together and make it a reality in pilots, and that's the work that I'm doing. And I know my colleagues Raymond and Aston are online somewhere. I can't see them, but they're here. And the big discoveries we've made are the importance of agriculture in the entire system. Agriculture holds the key to community resilience, community well-being, income, and climate adaptation, learning and education to actually empower people through knowledge, the huge value that's latent in systems and communications, and then the importance of collaboration, but just how difficult it is to do. And we've got 3 great speakers, and I'm going to ask each of them to speak for not more than 10-15 minutes. And then we'll have a panel discussion after that. So and they'll introduce themselves more fully, but we have Isifu from Ghana, working specifically with farming communities in northern Ghana. Claire, who's got a long history in humanitarian work, but has now created an ICT platform for local procurement. And John Katui is director of Oxfam in Kenya. And Oxfam have been, as an organization, quite vocal about the need for change. So I'm hoping we're going to pick up some hints and tips. Practical experience is what I'm looking for. So that's me done. I'll stop sharing and ask Isifu to open with your life's work in 15 minutes, which is quite difficult knowing how long I can talk for. So over to you, Isifu.
Thank you, Alan, for the brief introduction. I'll start with a brief introduction. I'm Isifu Sulemana. I am the team leader of SEAL. SEAL means Center for Ecological Agriculture and Livelihood. We are based in Walawale in northern Ghana. What is our work? SEAL is basically promoting sustainable agriculture among smallholder farmers. And that's exactly what we do. Currently, we work with over 10,000 smallholder farmers. I think the last time I checked, we are almost 15,000 now. And it's very amazing. What do we do with farmers? I think basically what we do is not entirely new. It is something that probably you might have heard of, or you've been trying as much as you can to also do that in your own or different places. But it is the approach and what we do that makes what we do here different from what you do. And that is why it's worth sharing with you. Let me say, to begin with, our approach is what I want to talk about, because that is actually what makes it our work a bit different from what you do. Sustainable agriculture is just a type of agricultural system that allows farmers to produce continuously, increasing their yields while taking care of others, and also they have to continue being in business from one generation to another. That is in simple way that I will talk about sustainable agriculture that we've all been doing. Now, various countries do it, or different people do it in a different way, or we could be doing it the same way, but the approach are different. We in SEAL believe that in trying to promote some of these agricultural systems. We believe in one, the farmers' own strength. We believe in strength in households. We believe in farmers' own indigenous knowledge. So we start with the farmers' own indigenous knowledge or farmer own knowledge. That is our approach. Now, in dealing with that, what it means is that we model all our projects around farmers' own indigenous knowledge. And then from there, we work together with the farmer and spread whatever he does. We also believe in working with farmers in groups. Why are we so? Why do we believe in this? We believe that through this, when we are working together in groups, there's going to be a cross-fertilization of ideas, and that makes it much more effective and efficient in spreading whatever knowledge that we try to use to achieve a sustainable agriculture. Now, to move forward, in terms of content, I did mention earlier that what we do probably might not be different because sustainable agriculture is sustainable agriculture, and we tried as much as we can to look at how to support a farmer or produce with little external inputs. What it means is that we make available or we make use of available local resources as much as we can. And some of them, some of these technologies that we promote are simple biochar, composting. We look at simple beekeeping technologies. We look at crop fishing integration systems. We also look at agroforestry models where probably we come out with a different model that allows the farmer to produce at the same time, also targeting certain fruit crops. So all this, we also train farmers to produce their own liquid fertilizers. And then of late, we exploit different ways of producing liquid fertilizers from even human urine, which we think that are now becoming more effective in the use, in the use of what? Increasing soil fertility in our local communities. Now, when we look at all this, what are the programs that we model? Now, I will talk more on the approach when I'm talking about the projects that we model. All our projects are modeled around the idea of the farmer-owned knowledge. So for instance, when you take our project number 1, we call it Solsifans. Solsifans is simple scaling up local innovation to improve food and nutritional security. It is something that we work in collaboration with many institutions. And this one, we use an approach called PID, that is Participatory Innovative Development Approach. What this simple means is identify exactly what the farmer is doing already, and then once it has benefits, it has potentials of increasing food security, we bring all the, let me say, people who matters, including people in academia, people in the universities, people in research institutions, people who are business oriented in some of this, and then we can jointly work with the farmer to develop it. Once we jointly work with the farmer to develop it, it becomes a locally product. Once a local product, then it becomes easy to spread and change all lives within that locality and even beyond. That is one. We also have M2M. M2M means mother to mother. This is an approach that allows one mother to identify her own innovation. We help her develop it, and then she trains her colleagues in the community. We also, of course, deal with what we call farmer to farmer. Farmer to farmer looks at most of the simple organic technologies that have already been developed by farmers. The composting, the production of what? Liquid organic fertilizers, the agroforestry models, the ethno-veterinary medicines. Once these ones are developed, then the farmer now trains her colleagues, who also train her colleague, and they also train their colleagues. By so doing, knowledge spread faster. And then, of course, we also have ethno-vet medicine. Veterinary medicine of late had become one of our key projects. Why do we say so? We realized that the livestock sector in northern Ghana was gradually dying because of one reason. The reason is that the vet officers are not sufficient. Vet medical doctors are not sufficient. The sector is, woefully under-resourced. Meanwhile, livestock is an important sector of our agricultural sector. So if it is collapsing, farmers have their own ways of experimenting their own herbs, which they've been using to solve some of these common diseases in livestock. So what this project was seeking to do, or what we are seeking to do, is to bring experts, work with the farmer, identify a particular common disease and some of the herbs that they are using. Then we jointly work together, develop it, and then from there, we can now make it available to the larger society so that they could use to solve some of these common diseases that confront them. We believe that when these approaches are used, what it means is that farmers are going to have a cheaper way of solving their own local problems. They will have local solutions to their own local problems. The technologies are very simple and they can easily be adaptable. It is also cheap to implement. I'll give you, for example, we are now dealing with over 15,000, almost 15,000 farmers. We spend just little over 35,000 euros. When you do a simple calculation in terms of Ghana cedis, it is costing us just 30 Ghana cedis to train a farmer. With this one, a farmer is capable of sustaining his household income and also improving his food security. So these are few projects that we're actually dealing with using, starting from the farmer own knowledge and farmer idea and jointly developing it together with the farmers. So I'm not sure, but if I still have time, then I can continue. Otherwise, I will pause here and then I can invite questions and then we can continue with our discussion. But the bottom line is we intend increasing farmer capacity, improving their resilience so that they are able to respond appropriately with disasters that comes with our location. And I have to let you understand this. In Northern Ghana, especially Walawale where we operate, we are basically sitting in the White Volta River Basin with a number of streams, rivers. Sometimes we have places we call overseas because they are cut off during part of the rainy season. This particular location, geographically, makes it somehow area that receive a lot of climate-related disasters. We get too much rains at a point in time. Sometimes the whole place gets flooded. Rivers get overflows. Those along the river banks will have all their crops and livestock wash away. Buildings will collapse. Then community whole amenities and infrastructure become more weakened. People become more food insecure. The ultimate destiny is for them to start migrating. Some will even migrate, some will migrate to the southern Ghana, to Accra, where they think they can get some menial jobs to do. Others will proceed through Burkina Faso, through the desert, attempting to cross to Europe through that perilous journey. So we are really sitting in the middle of natural disasters in terms of climate-induced ones. And therefore, some of the things that we do is to increase communities' resilience so that we believe that once they have simple technology that allows them to produce enough food, means that they can be food secured. They can dodge some of these disasters. And the more they become food secured income, the more they can prove to be more resilient to some of this disaster that it comes with. So this is the basis and the reasons why we do what we do. But mind you, that the type of agriculture we deal with here is a smallholder one. What it means that the average land size of each farmer is just between 3 to 4 acres. In some cases, 1, 2. And therefore, we do not want to look at an agricultural system that is too expensive. We want simple agricultural system that allows the farmer to produce comfortably and be able to increase his food and then nutrition wise in his community. These are the things that we deal with here, and that is where I want to say that yes. So if you have any question, you can ask.
Thank you, Isifu. We'll bank what you've said, and we'll move on to Claire. But the things that I took out of that for me are so powerful is the community working together, improving knowledge, finding really, I won't say the fundamental ways that are relatively cheap to improve the resilience of the community. And I did ask you for 3 wishes, but we're gonna have to come back to you for the 3 wishes. You can think about that. And we'll do the discussion at the end. So Claire, that's Isifu in Ghana. And now it's over to you to introduce yourself and what you're doing, and also your lived experience, because you've been all over Africa, I know. So there you go.
Thanks a million, Alan, and thank you, Isifu, for your brilliant story earlier on. To make a bridge, I studied tropical agriculture back in the days at university. And the reason I started this was at the age of 6. I was asked by Alan, by the way, to tell my story, why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I developed Solvos, which I'll introduce in a moment. But when I was 6 years old, the Great Famine in Ethiopia started, and I'm born and raised in the Netherlands. Didn't know that I was very fortunate at a very young age, but at the age of 6, I realized there was actually famine going on. I just was learning to read and write, and I thought it was as simple as doing a charity run and being able to buy food with it so the problem would be solved. But I was very fortunate to be at a Montessori kind of school system. So up at the age of 9, I realized that I could actually study tropical agriculture. So instead of raising funds at the age of 6, I thought at the age of 9, if I could study tropical agriculture, I could contribute to the world food problem. Little naive as I was, but it does tell my story on making a change possible. So when I was 18, I went to Wageningen University and started studying tropical agriculture. But in my second year, I got a guest lecture of a professor called Tia Hilhorst. And if you have never heard of her before, please check out what she's been reading and what she's been writing. And if you have a chance to listen to one of her lectures, I would recommend you to do so. But I was completely taken in that second year about the humanitarian principles, which comes with the humanitarian imperative comes first. So we have to take care of the needs first in the respect of, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, to which party you belong, neutrality, impartiality, all those matter, but it's the humanitarian lives that comes first. And that triggered me to move away from tropical agriculture, development aid, and I started focusing on humanitarian aid. And many years have passed since. I worked for many years with Doctors Without Borders. In 2010, I was in a DRC in Congo, and I realized that we could do so much more with the data we're having. And with that capacity, I came back to my headquarters and went to my boss in logistics in MSF for Doctors Without Borders. And I requested to do more on data-driven technology in our logistics and supply chain. It might sound boring, but I think it's the puzzle to solve everything we're having in the international aid sector. Because I will fast forward again many years. In 2016, I gave up my job because I realized there was a core problem. If we are serious about the grand bargain in our sector, if we really are serious about localizing aid, being as local as possible and global as necessary, we have to start looking how we're spending our money. And if you know that there's 10 million NGOs in the world, and only a couple of them gets a lot of funding from the international aid sector. And if we also know that from the core humanitarian agencies, the big international aid agencies, of any of their budgets, over 65% is spent on procurement activities. Whenever I drop the word procurement, a lot of people are zoning off because it's probably the most dullest subject you think about, but it actually is the coolest subject because it's the largest budget component, and we hardly focus on this one to enable change. And there is so much we can do to improve that component. If I take one step back, why I'm focusing on this component, we see needs are rising globally, whether it's the farmers, the agricultural situation as described by Isifu, or if it's the current situation in Sudan. We all see that needs are rising globally, and with the current climate change, it will only go up. So I think we can keep on asking for more money, but it will never go up in the same pace as the needs that are rising. And if we look at UN OCHA, the UN Agency for Humanitarian Coordination, they collect the urgent humanitarian appeals. For decades, they've not been able to fund over 50% of the dire needs. And those are just needs to avoid people from starving to death, basically. So they're the lone development projects. So if we cannot get even 50% funded, we can keep on asking for more money, but we can also reflect in our sector if the way we're spending that 50%, if we can actually increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the money we're having. And then I'm going back to that largest budget component, which is procurement. So that's when I started to become, to move away as a humanitarian operator or a humanitarian aid worker, and I became a humanitarian entrepreneur. I developed together with colleagues, with friends, an organization called Solvos. And we have basically 2 technical platforms developed, and both of them serve a different purpose that all combine. Because of our big procurement budget, if we look at the big international aid agencies, 4 to 14% is spent on consultancies. So if we don't know about building a composting toilet in Chad in a refugee setting, we very quickly hire consultants to come up with a design for a composting toilet. Or if we are to procure bed nets and we don't know a market, we hire a market assessment consultant. But if we know that only the big agencies have these large budget components, and if we know that all of this knowledge is being procured, of being spent with, I call it charitable money, with money that has been given to our sector to improve, it's a no-brainer that we should actually share that knowledge widely to empower any agency, regardless where you're situated, regardless how big you are, with that same knowledge. So that's how we set up our foundation. We have a Solvos Foundation and Solvos as a social enterprise. And our foundation is a keeper of open access knowledge. Whatever we do, whatever we know, we should put out there in an open access environment. And that's what you'll see on solvos.com. We support everybody with getting the right specifications of the solution you're requiring and that you want to procure. And getting your specifications right is extremely important, because otherwise we end up with unsustainable or unworking products or services. And also the context matters. And we all know, I know if you're logging in this session, you know that context matters, but sometimes it doesn't for some others. So I won't deep dive into that one. And what we have done is we integrated this catalog with a procurement workflow. Because if you know that a lot of donors are unable to fund as local as possible, despite all the big promises and the desire to work as local as possible, there is a catch-22, because they're so strict on the rules and regulations on spending institutional donor money that you have to be compliant to so many rules, regulations, and specifically in procurement, there's so many tools and reports you're requiring. So what we have developed is a procurement workflow that is fully compliant with the big donor rules and regulations like the World Bank, like DG ECHO, like USAID. So if you follow that workflow and you have all the reports available at hand that is compliant to the rules and regulations, we hope to empower as many local NGOs and civil society organizations, health agencies with a compliant system like any of the big organizations, where having your what we call a back office, your consultant, your expert on your one shoulder, and your procurement officer on your other shoulder. And then the last bit in this whole debate, in this whole solution, is that over 2/3 of the aid supplies, and I'm talking now of in the humanitarian aid supplies, are flown in internationally. Our supply chains are extremely poor and extremely fragile, and we saw that during COVID. If 2/3 are flying in, and most of them in bulk passenger flights, when the passenger flights are grounded, our supplies are not coming in. But what is even worse is that we often disrupt local markets. There are generators available anywhere in the world, and there's no need to ship them in from the UK or from the Netherlands or anywhere else. We could buy them as local as possible. So what we're trying to do with this procurement workflow, which is basically a market assessment tool, your request for quotations, we open back the yellow pages from back in the days when I was at my grandmother's. She always had these yellow pages on her coffee table with thousands of pages of companies. And now if we are looking for a supplier in Ghana, we are opening Google, but only the suppliers that have a large budget you can find on Google, because you have to pay to end up high in the search results. What we're trying to do is having back the yellow pages and opening a fair marketplace for all actors in this sector. So basically that's my story, and that's what Solvus does. And I try to stick within the 5 minutes. I'm hoping for questions.
That's great, Claire. Thank you so much. And what are your 3 wishes?
That the commitments that are made in policies are actually going to be operationalized, that we're moving away from strategy into action. And my 3rd one I'll wait for in the end.
Into action. Well, you made some really interesting points I'm going to pick up in the questions, but the whole issue of global wealthy north meeting people in need in south, and the requirement for compliance and the regulatory environment is actually, for me, a really hot topic. How do you bridge that and find a way to build the trust? So I think that's and if we think back to Isifu, the thing that he's created more than anything else is trust with his community. I mean, it's amazing to think there are 10,000 farmers with their families that he's helping, and the very small cost per farmer. So John, it's your turn. So over to you to introduce yourself and tell us your life experience, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I hope you can all hear me clearly. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in this space, especially on the shift from charity to empowerment, and on making the local central. And just to build on to what you're saying, I think we all acknowledge that I think when you look at the disaster response sector has been dominated by what has been characterized as the white saviorism. So people flying in with white faces from the north to come and save us starving in the south from hunger or climate change or diseases, pandemics, and everything else. And that has to shift. And I'm not here to really make a case for why local leadership should be embraced. I think that the case has been won already. I'm just here to share a few of our own little efforts in Kenya to try to shift to that future that should actually be the precedent about making centering local leadership in work that we do, and doing that in solidarity with those who care from a humanity perspective, whether you sit in the north, west, south, that we're all human beings and we care about other human beings, and we're able to mobilize resources and support them wherever they are, but we do not take leadership from their hands just because we have the money. So that's what I'm here to say. Maybe let me start with where the thinking that actually informs what we do, and then I'll come to what we do in Kenya. Maybe as a way of introduction, my name is John Kitui. I'm the country director with Oxfam here. I've been with Oxfam for about three years now, and working with a great team here to really promote the local leadership in both disaster response, but generally in all development work that we're doing. And I'll come to the practical things that we've done, and then we can have conversations around that in the past. So Oxfam has been around for quite some time, probably many of you would know. And in the recent past, we've developed a strategy that we call Fight Inequality to End Poverty and Injustice. And Oxfam has been hugely adoptive of the feminist principles that they wants to inform their work, including power sharing, the personal is political, nothing about us without us, diversity and inclusion, and all these values that really have underpinned the feminist movements inform the great work that we do, and for all the good reasons. And one way that also that has influenced how we do things in Kenya is the intent to be in the world what we'd like to see in the world. So if we want to really make the world a much equal place, then how we show up has to reflect those values, have to reflect that spirit. We can't show up as in a very traditional colonial, top-down, very patriarchal, patronizing way with local partners, with communities, with other stakeholders we work with, and then hope that we can change the world and make it much more equal and much more respectful of each other. So that's kind of the reasons that we do what we do. In Kenya, for example, we've tried to position ourselves as standing in solidarity with our partners, who are usually local actors working in their own context to try and shift the odds in their favor. And this range from both community level organizations to national level organizations to sometimes regional level organizations, but really enabling them to lead the way they lead. This ranges from also working with non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, farmer associations, the public sector, some of the local for-profit organizations, a wide range of local actors, including schools and churches where people run to during disaster, and to see how to support them to do what they do best. And doing that, we've tried to also be more humble in how we show up. Most of the time is because as Oxfam, we have the brand identity. We're able to mobilize resources from many donors from the West, that actually we channel those resources to local organizations, and they lead on decision making. So in terms of what are the priorities, what are the needs of this community, where should the money be going, how should it be going to reach, how will we account for it? That decision making we're transferring to local partners as well, to determine, once we've given them the funds, where the funds are involved. But also we ask the partners to let us know when we can provide technical support. So we're working with some of the networks I'll mention later that we are doing just simple things like safeguarding and protection of women and girls during cash transfers. How do you embed some of those safeguarding principles within the work? And we're trying to leverage on Oxfam's expertise on that to do. We also do downward accountability. How are you as a local partner? How can you account to your own communities? How do you account to stakeholders? How do you make sure that you're actually responding to real needs of women and girls and men in your communities, building those downward accountability mechanisms as well, because we have the expertise to do that, and we ask that partners come to us and seek for that expertise, and then we channel that to them. Oxfam has come to settle on 3 key value add in Kenya. And one of the things we think we do well and want to continue doing that is the ability to convene different stakeholders. Sometimes how the world works, it's in a very complex systems. And when you look at the local level, you require suppliers, you require local actors, you require governments to do their bits as well. And also different kinds of stakeholders. Our ability to convene, bring them together, have conversations around who's doing what, where, is what Oxfam does well. The other thing that we do well is also just the research and knowledge generation. There are several reports that Oxfam produces that even our partners found them useful. The inequality report is usually launched around the Davos conference, when the rich meet up in Switzerland to have conversations around money. We publish an inequality report. We also publish the commitment to reducing inequality report. We've also recently published a report called The Dangerous Delays, such that when we talk about the disasters in the South, like the drought that has been here, whether it was COVID-19 and the vaccine response, they were all delayed. But then Ukraine happens and the world is falling over itself to go save Ukraine, or something else happens in Europe and everyone else wants to help. But when we have disasters elsewhere in the global South, there's no response to it. And it's just showing the dangerous delays that actually cost life in the sector. And our local actors find some of those reports very, very useful. And of course, the influencing amplification of local voices, for example, on issues of climate change, on issues of drought financing, on inequality, on illicit financial flows and tax and the debt crisis that cripple governments in the South from investing in public services that then impact on the local needs. We do that influencing, but we're basically amplifying the communities of the voices of communities affected by the drought at the local level to make sure that voices reach the COP, for example, or reach the global conversations on some of those issues. And ultimately, of course, because the fundraising sector has not changed much, we also focus on how we fundraise and then channel those resources to local actors. Now, this is kind of the theoretical bit. So what practically we've done, in Kenya, we made a decision. So over the past 15 years, we've been trying to shift from that direct implementation with a lot of people on the ground to local leadership. And we had to close two of our largest field offices. Oxfam in Kenya, at some point, we had about 300 staff spread across two main regions. We work in the arid and semi-arid lands, and we made that difficult choice to say, no, there are local actors who can do this work. Let's close shop and see how we support them better. And so we closed down, we reduced from 300 staff to about 25 staff in Nairobi, but we've scaled up now because of the drought response that we've been responding to. But on average, we have about 25 to 30 staff who focus on supporting local actors. We've also been part of the formation of a network called the ASAL Humanitarian Network. ASAL is arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya. With ASAL Humanitarian Network is a network of about 30 local organizations that are spread across the arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya. They are humanitarian responders and they are first line, and we focus on supporting them as a movement to respond. We've also supported another network to emerge, calling the Okoa Uchumi Coalition, which is Saving the Economy Coalition. It's a network of several organizations that really advocate on the issues of public finance management, government allocation of resources to public services, and they've effectively lead on that. As a matter of financing, during COVID-19, Oxfam Kenya transferred 60% of the response of the resources we raised through local actors. But during the drought response that has been going on since 2021, we've channeled about 85% of all the resources we managed to mobilize for the drought response through the ASAL Humanitarian Network. They've been leading on the cash transfers, on the mobilization, identifying areas of greatest need and channeling those funds to those areas. So I think we're doing our little bit to make that reality of centering local actors to happen. Maybe I'll finish by saying a few challenges, and I think, Alan, my three wishes will come from these ones as well. So the challenges that we continue to face, I think it's, as I mentioned earlier, the disaster industry, as one would call it, is very colonial in its nature. And as I said, it's still dominated with white saviorism in it as well. And that's why organizations still call themselves like Oxfam Family Relief, because they exist to relieve people, or Save the Children. They want to save somebody somewhere, or International Rescue Committee. They want to go and rescue somebody out there. Or Christian Aid, or Danish Relief, Danish Church Aid. So all these organizations exist to aid and relieve and to save and to rescue and to relieve, including my own that I work with. And I think the power in the name is just telling. How are we trying to change the sector if our names themselves are very, very patriarchal and patronizing, in the sense that we want to save the world and relieve it and aid it and rescue it and everything else? So we cannot flip the system that centers donors and European organizations to ones that center local organizations unless we really tackle the DNA that we have, unless we really address the very, very fundamental elements of our own creation and construction in era that I think for large organizations like ourselves are constructed in. And one of the things we're doing is working with actually local actors like the ASAL Humanitarian Network to go to the donors directly and influence them to shift resources to local actors without having to use the INGOs as intermediaries. And then INGOs like Oxfam will find a better way to add value. That's not about necessarily fund management, but that happens. Now, the other challenge is, while from a theoretical perspective, we wanted to shift as Oxfam, and there's plenty of conversations within that want to really shift to center local actors. We still have very compliance-oriented finance teams and operations teams that are, and for good reason, they have 200 pages from donors for compliance and procedures to comply with. And that happens to perpetuate the colonial relationships between INGOs and local actors. And so the marginal improvements we're trying to do and everything else do not seem to be moving way as long as the donors continue to have a very long list of compliance, that then our finance operations, internal audit teams will have to comply with. And it can be nice. We can try to be less colonial in our approach to this, but we still have to make sure that we cascade these compliance measures to them. And I think for me, that's where influencing the donors has a huge impact on shifting the sector a bit to one where we center local actors. And lastly, I think the money continues to be the currency of power in the sector, as it is in the whole world. I think we live in the neoliberal capitalist world after socialism and communism lost the battle. And therefore, money and capital continues to be the key driver of power and power relations in the whole world. And therefore, even some of our local actors sometimes just come to us and say, hey, I just want the money. And the incentive for them is not necessarily to challenge the power of INGOs like Oxfam or to challenge donors. They just want the money somehow. And I think for me, that kind of perpetuates some of the dysfunctions we see in the sector. So the big question should be, how do we weaponize money in our sector? How do we make people not instrumentalize money in a way that then perpetuates power? How do we make sure that people stop the arrogance to thinking that just because you have money, then it assumes you have knowledge, you have the local knowledge, you have the local expertise and everything else, and defer that to people who actually know best, who are local actors. They are there in the community. They'll be there throughout. They've been there. They know the solutions that work there as farmers. They know what can grow there, as opposed to shipping corn from the US and saying, oh, plant this one, it will end hunger in your context. So I think for me, weaponizing money has to be one of the top priorities. And I think for me, probably one of my wishes that actually we can have a sector that centers saving lives and supporting local actors to be on the front line of ending poverty and injustice, as opposed to just because I have the money, I'll come to you with knowledge, with expertise, and I'll tell you how to do development on yourself. So I think that's my random thoughts on what we're doing as Oxfam Kenya. I think we're still struggling with a lot as well, even in our own identity as well. Sometimes I wonder, do I work for Oxfam or am I part of the Oxfam? Am I trying to change the context in Kenya, or am I just an employee of a large international organization? And so sometimes, especially as a first Kenyan to be a country director for Oxfam, I struggle with my own identity. But I think we have to keep changing the system from within, and hopefully then we have a world where local actors can have more say and more leadership on what they do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you. I'm happy to engage on any questions that may be there on anything that I've said. Thank you.
Wow, John, thank you. And thank you to Claire and Isifu as well. You've all three of you blown me away, and I'm desperately trying to configure my thoughts and put some questions back to you. If I could just recount my own experience briefly. My first exposure to the aid and development sector was with a small disaster relief charity, sending tents around the world in response to disasters. And we were asked to look at the logistics, and exactly as Claire said, particularly the logistics were as much as 100% of the cost of the goods. So quite a significant cost. And we got some feedback from the field, which said that actually people didn't want tents; they wanted materials to rebuild their homes, and that burnt a hole in my head. But actually, it was completely contradictory to the business model of the organization. So it dismantled some of their raison d'etre. So that was a big challenge. And they do some of it now, but they don't do a lot. And then secondly, a visit to India, working with a local NGO called Gunj. And interestingly, the Gunj is a Hindi word, which means echo. And the whole ethos of Gunj, which has significantly informed our work in the disasters group and my whole outlook, has been to find ways, as Isifu has described, to inform and empower local people, as John has described, to put the decision making back in the hands of the people, but to give them the support so that they're making decisions in their own context. And And then as Claire would recognize, actually enabling through their network the local procurement. And I remember running one of these sessions in 2021 for Catalyst, very early days Catalyst, and playing to what John said, one of the people in India said, look, you know, people sent us ventilators and we didn't know how to work them. Actually, all we wanted was paracetamol. And through that insight and sitting on rocks in farmyards, which has probably been one of the most inspirational things I've been able to do in the last few years, is just to listen and then to realize that a lot of the prejudice as well as the bureaucracy mitigates against what academically is known as collaboration and getting people to work together in the context of the fact that that's not how the system has worked and that's not how the money power dynamic has worked. So I would like each of you just and I'm going to start with John, so I'm giving you a bit of warning, John. What's been your experience of standing this thing on its head and empowering local people and then getting them to work together in new ways? How difficult has that been? Because the language changes, doesn't it? It's very subtle. It's not a straightforward thing at all. So it's a very open question, John, and I'll put the same question to Isifu and Claire in turn, but and then maybe you want to discuss it amongst yourselves. So over to you, John. How have you gone about that? Seems to me to be a key.
No, thanks, Alan. Everything changes, to be honest, but it's because I think one of the things we've realized early on, and we've tried to resist, is to create mini Oxfams at the local level. Because I think the temptation is to go and convert every CBO, every local organization to look like yourself, to have systems like yourself, to have your processes like yourself, which actually is just creating the same bigger industry at a smaller level. I think for the movements we are supporting currently, I think we've had to be more humble and more listening and learning ourselves than anything else. So when you look at, for example, the ASAL Humanitarian Network, it came together and they're very, very collaborative. It started off as 6 organizations, now grown to 30 organizations, but it's very, very fluid. We even tried to ask them, do you want to register? They said, no, they don't want to register because they want to keep it very fluid so that if it doesn't add value, they walk out. No, nothing, no signing anywhere, they just walk out. The Okoa Uchumi Coalition as well, we came together and we're supporting them as a coalition that was advocating on issues of debt and everything else. Then they decided they don't want to be a network. They wanted to have a single organization that convinced them. And they selected one of the organizations in Kenya called the Institute of Social Accountability to be the convener of that space. And on a regular basis, on a monthly basis, they meet and discuss and everyone goes and does their own ways. So I think for me, one of the things I've learned is to always be very open when you go to the local actors and how they want to collaborate and how they want to lead, that it will be very, very original and very, very different. And then also this, even within the ASAL Humanitarian Network, when you go to the counties where they're working with, the relationships with government, it's very, very unique in each of those places. Where there's good political will, it's more collaboration. Where there is little political will, there is very, very combative advocacy and influencing and shaming and going to the roads and picketing. So like you have to accept that actually the diversity has to be diversity. And sometimes it's very, very uncomfortable, but I think it's just learning to learn more than going there and saying, oh, this doesn't look like what I'm used to. And then working with them. I would like to respond to a question that someone has put there before I hand over about local actors.
I haven't seen it. Go for it.
Yeah, so there's, thanks, let me just check. Sorry, this is from Ruthie Lucy on local actors being corrupt and projects don't work sometimes. And all this is the stereotype that many INGOs have used to keep the money power within themselves. Now, I can tell you systems predict corruption better than geography, color, region, nature of the organization. We keep saying the UK is as corrupt as Kenya is corrupt. The difference is that the UK have systems and people go to jail. There's been a few scandals where a procurement company from the UK on the elections was engaged in corruption with Kenyan elections. And those people were jailed in the UK. In Kenya, we elected them into office because there's no systems. So for the local actors, where we've realized is actually you need to move money to local actors to build systems within. Why Oxfam does not have a lot of corruption cases, or no, why Oxfam does not have a lot of scandals is because we have systems in place. If someone is caught corrupt or stealing or anything else, the system deals with that. There's investigation, disciplinary process is invoked, and then action is taken. That is a deterrence in itself. Local actors need to just be empowered with core funding and restricted income to invest in those systems. And I think for me, the corruption that we see will not be happening. So I think for me, what local actors require is just core funding, secure funding for a long time, maybe say 3-4 years of core investments to really invest in their own systems. Otherwise, the stereotype saying local actors are thieves and then INGOs are not thieves, that's not true. Even within Oxfam, we're dealing with issues of corruption and theft and fake receipts all the time, just that the systems is able to catch it and deal with it because of the core resources that we control. So once you shift that core resource to local actors, they will have those systems and you will have that stereotype saying the local actors are thieves and corrupt. Thanks.
That's great, John. And what you just said really strikes a chord with me, that you really have to value and recognize diversity, even if you don't understand it. So I've had that experience in the very small thing we're trying to do with Catalyst, and finding myself not understanding what I'm looking at and saying this doesn't necessarily follow what I might expect, but then rather than putting up the shutters, actually saying, I've got to find a way to embrace this. I've got to ask the question again. I've got to have that discussion and see if we can move it on. And that's been a huge learning for me. And to be candid, I think it's part of me finding ways to decolonialize myself. You know, I'm sitting here in a relatively wealthy house in rural part of England with very little prior experience. So it's really tough. And you carry that back to Westminster and Whitehall and the bureaucracy, then there's a huge issue in overcoming the ideology and inertia of the old way of doing things, so as well as the ignorance. Fine, thank you, John. Claire, how about you? And then Isifu. So, can you hold enough of this remarkable discussion in your mind to follow a question?
No, I was about to say the same remarks as John. So I also wanted to step into the remarks of Ruthie Lucy. So thank you for Ruthie for prompting something that is actually on the heads in the minds of everybody. I think corruption and fear for fraud has been putting our whole sector into a position that we are unable to move, and it's happening everywhere. In the Netherlands, there was a massive corruption case, or I don't know if it's called corruption. No, it was fraud. It was a fraud case in procurement. So that's happening everywhere. And I think in the area where we are now, in this decade, technology has never been more ready to support structures. So how we operate with the same purpose of doing good, it doesn't mean that I have to be going anywhere else. So I left operational aid sector in 2010, and I've been focusing on digital technology. And what John was mentioning, it's all about the systems that can be put in place. And fear for corruption can never be an argument on not doing something in a different way. There's rotten apples in any location, in any sector, and it's everywhere. I often explain also the case in our sector, it's always with a magnifying glass as well. So we all remember when the Me Too started. We all know that there was a filmmaker in America. I don't even have to mention his name. We all know that guy was out there. We still watch his movies. But when something like that happens in our sector, nobody knows the name. We might potentially know the name of the organization where it happened, but most likely it will be the aid sector being blamed for one case. And I think we should be very careful for that one. And then moving to my area is digital technology. It's not a golden bullet. It doesn't solve the problems, but it does enable what we're trying to achieve and having the systems in place, as John mentioned. And for procurement, there's a lot of potential corruption and fraud taking place. And if we don't have technical systems and digital systems, and this goes for the big international agencies as well as the small organizations, if we don't show in an open system our quotations, how we're scanning the market, even with paper-based systems, there's so much fraud potentially under the surveys. And I think with technology, there's so much opportunities to address this, but also to support every actor anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter from which organization you are. So it's a matter of trust building. And I also like the remark of Ruthie on, I think we should be very grateful for the donors that they do fund. We just have to, as a sector, enable that change that they like to pursue as well.
Yeah, that's as I said, there's so many ideas rattling around in my brain from the discussion. I'm struggling to order them, but I think the fear of what might be is something I've encountered a number of times in the last 2 years, and it holds people back from doing something for a risk they don't necessarily fully understand, and it's a mindset thing as much as anything. How do you actually trust somebody? And John was remarking on some political environments being very positive and others being less so, and you can follow that around the world with 169 governments. There will be a different appetite and political structure and biases right around the world, and I've been around enough to have seen it. So that is an environment, but it shouldn't stop us trying to do things where we believe we can. And going back to your systems, the one thing that systems do provide is transparency, provided the measures come off it. Have you reflected recently on the opportunities for artificial intelligence? Everybody's talking about the opportunities there, Claire. Is that something you've picked up and are thinking about? Is there an opportunity there in our sector?
Now I can give the advice to local actors that there's the big international agencies, they use the ChatGPT for actually writing their funder proposals, and I've learned quite a few that are very effective with it. But yeah, I'm myself not working with it, but they are so smart that they are actually able to drive and write your effective funding proposals.
Well, there's a clue for me, because I'm trying to write one at the moment, so that's fascinating. Right, Isifu, building collaboration, building trust, both within your communities, but within with other agencies in your district. So how are you going about that, Isifu?
I think let me start by making my 3 wishes, because probably we might forget, and then I can come to that. Number 1, I think basically where we are, our major challenge or all the disasters that we face is as a result of the climate change. We are also lucky that the international community is working together to find some answers. A lot of promises have been made. So my number 1 wish is, if the international community, the people who matter, who made all those promises over so many years, are able to stick to their commitment, not just the commitment, but honestly. It is not just what they say on paper, but they should actually demonstrate a real honesty in executing what they have promised. I think will be better. Whatever is happening elsewhere affects us here. And that is my number 1 wish, that those who matters, who made all those international commitments and have the capacity and ability to make things work, should do that with regards to all the climate promises that they have made. We want to see them doing it honestly, and that's my number one wish. Number two, there are a number of climate financing mechanisms, but the people who suffers so much from all this climate crisis are us. When I say us, we and our local communities. And we are far from those monies. It is difficult. They put a number of barriers for us to actually access those monies. It is probably sometimes, practically impossible to access them. What do we need to change things on the ground are very small, not big. So if my wish is, if some of this financing mechanism can be made as simple as it can. For example, Kitchen Table Charitable Trust, with their simple financing mechanism, have been able to change or will change a number of women within the shortest possible time. This is my second wish, that yes, we want to see all those financing mechanisms be reduced to a very simple way, very easy way for people who actually matter to access them very easily and comfortably. Number three, I want to say that the change we are all looking for, please, the key is with the local communities and people who work with them direct. It is not with those who are far away. And therefore, I want to, my last wishes, if the international community, or they should trust those communities and work with them and make resources available to them. They are the only people who can bring the change we're all looking for. So these are the three wishes. Thank you. Now I'll go to my question. I think at the community level, it's much easier to work together, to network, work with institutions and agencies, because one, we understand the problem. We know what it is. Alan, I want to share this experience with you. Sometimes we in SEAL use just a simple project component because that particular component is solving a problem. It rallies so many people around it. Take, for example, the idea of introducing local soil amendment process, which allows farmers to work together to build their own compost. During this time, they share a lot of stories, they share a lot of experience, they work together, they become permanent partners in sharing experience and all those things. That particular alone improves the unity among them. Look, they care so much about each other. Just because they come together to build compost, it has improved the way they work together. It has improved their unity level. It has improved how they harmonize ideas and work together. Some of these groups have now metamorphosized into a well-organized cooperative, which eventually allows them to sell their products with common price. Now having a say in how they determine which price, which crop should they grow, and how should they grow it, which method. That is how it began. It just began with a simple idea of, oh, there's a problem of we all losing because we don't know how to improve our soil. Our yields are going down. We cannot rely on the government policy of supplying fertilizer because it is no more coming. Now we've gotten an idea where we can use a locally available resources to improve our soil fertility. But we require a number of labor, and therefore we need to help each other. In our language, we call it Sungtaba. Sungtaba means that help each other. We need a certain quantity. And therefore, during the preparation, Farmer A has to invite 10 people or 15 people in the community. They work together and work in turns. Eventually, it becomes a network or a cooperative. And now they do a lot of things together. This is also going on between communities, where they move to another community and train each other, and then they are forming a network. So all that I want to say is that probably it is national level network that is sometimes difficult, just as what's the name, Oxfam has been able to share with us that even that one is now working. But at community level, it's much easier, and it is the best way to actually bring the change that we are looking for. Thank you.
That's fantastic. So your message really on the collaboration is find little things, because if little things work, then they grow. And I'm trying to avoid the word simple because it has all sorts of connotations, but maybe easy things, but they're only easy once you've done them. It's a fascinating insight. And just tell me, do you end up working with the local government in your area, or do they let you get on with it? What relationship do you have with the authorities?
In actual fact, almost all the things that we do it together. For example, ethnovet medicine that we're trying to promote. We work together with the Ministry of Food and Agriculture, especially the livestock unit, together to identify a particular common disease, which farmers themselves are experimenting. And then we jointly work together to improve it. What I'm aware is our collaboration is like a tripartite. The local civil society organizations working with communities direct, which sometimes we call ourselves together with local institutions, and we do influence each other. Now we have worked up to a point where we are even influencing them to institutionalize some of these local innovations into the way they do things. Instead of following strictly government policy where decisions are made from the highest level and imposed on the communities, now we have gradually worked to reverse that, because these institutions, officers working for state, have now seen the need to work from the bottom to the up. And they tell governments how simple, how these common approaches are making more, are more effective and making more change than imposing it from the highest level to the local level. So working together is fantastic. Today, there is no committee at the regional level that I don't sit on, because of our experience in bringing on board what are the local felt needs, what are the communities looking for, telling them the community story, and telling them even in policy direction, this is likely not to work, or if you modify it this way, it is likely to work. So this is what I want to share with you.
That's great. So practical example of building trust just through your own actions and continuously communicating. I've got one more question because we're down to 10 minutes now, and it's going to be impossible for me to sum up. But going back to my heritage in business management, one of the big things in management behavior is the maxim that what gets measured gets managed. So if you can measure things and report on them, then very often that triggers a change, because it becomes clear that you need to make that change. To each of you, and I'll start with Claire. I hope that's not going to put you on the spot, Claire. What should the sector as a whole be managing, and how might one go about that? And obviously ICT has got a huge opportunity to support that. Is that in the too difficult category, that question? Sorry.
So which KPI basically to add to the sector to change?
KPIs, yeah, that's complete management speak though, isn't it? There you go.
So which key performance indicator? I always advocate towards donors these days to add a indicator for local procurement. And sorry for keep on asking, going back to procurement, but if we start to buy more locally, we're strengthening local economies, whether it's a local or in an international aid agency. But we don't have indicators. We don't report on those, how we're buying. And I think if, as long as we don't have them in the sector, nothing will change on that spending component. This is also what I sometimes have discussions with ambassadors of several I cannot name them which ones, but of several African countries. If an organization comes in and it's a foreign organization, you have to operate with a memory of understanding. You just cannot come in and just do your thing. But what isn't on the table, and they always like to have that, is that we should procure as local as possible, but we don't have mechanisms and nobody reports on it. And as long as we are not obliged to report on it, as you mentioned, things will not change. And I think there's no reason for us to go back to the generators to fly things in that are available locally. So if we're buying items, whether international or a local organization or I hate the term local organization, national entity, when a national entity or an international organization buys things, I think we should have the indicators, what we procure within the country, within the region, and what we procure internationally, and justify it accordingly.
And just going back and picking up of course, the grand bargain has tried to shift the routing of funds, and that's not been perhaps the greatest success. And intellectually, you could dismantle the grand bargain in a whole range of different ways. But that has got a KPI within it. So is that just because people aren't then held accountable to it because it's too macro, or what? Have you any reflection on why that's not working?
So for those that don't know the Grand Bargain, it's the largest commitment ever made between NGOs and donors on 10 main streams that need to change. And for me, the most important one is that by a couple of years, that 25% of the funding was supposed to go to national NGOs. Up to today, we're only at 2%, and basically nothing has changed, not even behind the comma. But then I think it goes back to the ability for the donors to fund as local as possible. So if we expect them, everybody to have a SAP system, and if they don't have SAP, we don't see them as auditable, I think that is what holds the whole system into a system that's unable to move. And I think we can, and then we're looking at the entrepreneurs, we're looking at technology. There are so many different ways that are now possible to support those. So if we blind stare at SAP, yeah, then we cannot expect everybody to use SAP because it's expensive. It's and also I think there should be more mechanism in a near network. I cannot emphasize the network enough to do a lot of work on this. There is this trust mechanism required as well on how to report on good NGOs, going back to Ruthie's comment as well. There are many ways to audit a financial system or reporting mechanism of an organization. It should not only be SAP, but a booklet, if you're only spending 20K annually, can be as good. So I think that is the change that is needed.
That's great. John, over to you for final thoughts on measurement, and I know that Oxfam does put a lot of effort into this, but what are your views on that?
Thanks, Alan. Maybe we need to flip and start looking at what we need to measure less, because I think the sector measures bins too much. So the bin counting, number of people reached, number of people done that, it creates a very wrong incentive to focus on the efficiency from the typical economics lens. And that when you do cost benefit analysis, cost efficiency analysis, it actually incentivizes large organizations that then do deliver efficiency aid efficiently. And I think you look at donors like even BFID and others now have moved a lot. Even now they're saying, oh, private sector can deliver aid more efficiently, because you're counting, if I give you this amount of money, how many people can you make sure you deliver family planning to their doorstep? Of course, that creates a very wrong incentive. So I think before even we start talking about what we need to measure, can we start stopping to measure some of these things, like just the bin counting that we do in the sector, because I think it creates a very, very wrong incentive. Now, this is probably very superfluous, but I think for me, we need to measure things like how many decisions made locally on the needs, on the solutions, and where the money goes. just in the sector, in organizations like Oxfam, how many decisions have been made on this drought response? How much of those decisions were actually made locally? How many of those were colonially made at headquarters, whether in Nairobi or the Oxford or wherever? Let's measure those decisions. I think the other probably is the appropriateness of aid, just doing surveys and looking at the communities that receive aid, how much of that aid was appropriate. How many of them received air ventilators when they needed, all they needed was paracetamol, because someone just thought because they had the money, they had the right to dictate what could be delivered. So the appropriateness of aid could be also a very good indicator. And maybe a third one is mutual accountability, because I think the sector is dominated by a lot of upward accountability, local actors to an INGO to a donor, and like that. How much of accountability goes downward? Just number of cases of complaints or feedback mechanisms that have been measured and how that was responded, so that we institute a bit of the downward accountability, so that actually intermediaries also have a responsibility to say, this is our offer to you. How much have we delivered that offer? And was it imposed to you, or did you come asking for it in the first place? Was it relevant, or was it just you determining what our needs are? Now, these are probably more qualitative measures. And I think in the sector and from an economics perspective, we prefer more quantitative things than subjective qualitative issues. But if we are talking about power relations and shifts in power relations and centering local actors, then we have to look at measures that are very, very qualitative, lived experiences of local actors, and center those in our metrics. But probably to create room for that, as Claire was joking, saying another KPI to add to the long list, let's stop measuring some things. And the bin counting could actually do with the dustbin for now.
I've got you, Claire. Do you want to add?
Yeah, just on I was triggered on a practical example when you mentioned accountability, John. I think while I'm focusing so much on procurement, because you can actually measure how you're operating, how many organizations are focusing women empowerment and training on women in businesses, and how many of them have a policy in place to procure from women-owned businesses? So we shouldn't measure if they have that policy, but we should actually measure how much do they actually procure then from women-owned businesses. If you keep on doing for 20 odd years training on women empowerment and women in businesses, and you don't even procure from women-owned companies, and you can even further not specify what counts for a woman-owned company. Is that the level of shareholders in a company? Is it at management level, or is it workforce? I think that is what really put your money where your mouth is, action and indicators. Sorry, I wanted to give that example following John earlier.
Absolutely great. And I'm looking at the time. If John's put his thumb up, that's it's waving to us. Brilliant. If there's anybody who has a question, if they can wave or put their hands in the chat, but I'm minded of one of my favorite books by an economist called Mr. E.F. or Professor E.F. Schumacher, who wrote A Study of Economics as If People Really Mattered, and coined the term small is beautiful. And then there's a Nobel laureate economist called Amartya Sen, who introduced the concept of well-being, and in spite of the fact that we probably need to measure something, actually well-being is the hardest thing to measure. And just listening to Isifu and John particularly, the empowerment that the local communities get to become creative on their own behalf is, for me, the change that, if I can see that more widespread in my lifetime, and it's not new, if I could see that, that would be something that I would treasure. And it is completely counter to the perception of the economies of scale. And for me, just summing up, I think Claire's experience of the opportunity for local procurement, putting money back into the economy, but also very often a lot cheaper, that's the big opportunity. So I think the combination of what John and Isifu is doing together with the technology, enabling visibility, I think that's the future. And in our small disasters group, that's what we're trying to promote and build, particularly around a community in East Africa at the moment, but it's just a starting point. So I'm going to close, Lana. Is that okay? And but thank you to Isifu, Claire, and John for their contribution. I hope those that were listening in got some value from the discussion. It will be recorded. And I think I can see David, my colleague, was there. I think we've actually picked up some really memorable quotes. So expect to be quoted. Bless you all. Thank you so much for your contributions. I really appreciate it. Is that okay, Lana?
Yes, thank you very
We
much.
need to
It was an
finish. We
amazing
finished
session.
on time. That's the main thing.
Exactly.
And there's Karen, and I need to thank you for our lovely website, Karen, for the disasters group. I really appreciated that too. So thank you so very, very much.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.